Tomorrow, the entire House Republican Conference will be outlining Joe Biden's entire year of crises. And on Friday, we will start the day by highlighting the national security crises focusing on Joe Biden's weakness on the world stage that has emboldened our adversaries in Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow. House Republicans will close out the week by defending our right to life with supporters from across the country. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues who lead committees and lead the Republican Docs Caucus, the GOP Docs Caucus, to discuss Joe Biden's worsening COVID crisis. This month, the U.S. broke the record for the most COVID hospitalizations at over 132,000 people hospitalized, and more Americans died from COVID-19 in 2021 than in 2020. President Biden failed to deliver on his promise to shut down the virus. To discuss this more, we have our GOP Docs Caucus leader, Congressman Brad Wenstrup, who will come up to the mic.
Thank you very much, Elise, and thank you all for being here. Honesty is the best policy. Hopefully, that's something that you all grew up with. People hunger for truth, clarity, and trust. Americans prefer to be educated and not indoctrinated. Americans prefer caring over criticism. Patients prefer good bedside manner from their caregivers. We know from the vaccine trials that some vaccinated patients still get COVID. We learned that vaccinated patients were less likely to become seriously ill from COVID and were less likely to be hospitalized. We also know that some patients with certain health conditions are at a greater risk of more severe disease from COVID. We also know that viruses produce variants. So even if 100% of the globe was vaccinated, unfortunately, we are still dealing with COVID-19 in some form or another. Our Doctors Caucus is pro-vaccine. We've been vaccinated. We're also strongly in favor of treatments for COVID-19 and its symptoms. As doctors, we work to get patients well. We discuss risk versus benefits. President Biden was wrong to declare we are looking at a winter of severe illness and death for the unvaccinated. If you're vaccinated and you have your booster shot, you're protected from severe illness and death. See, every patient is different. Blanket statements can be very dangerous. There are some reported risks associated with the vaccines. There may be even greater risk if you have certain medical conditions. Patients want to know about their own natural immunity if they have it. Patients want to know how to bolster their immunity and stay healthy. The benefits of vaccination may outweigh your risk. They often do, more times than not. However, every individual is extremely unique. Mandating care and bypassing the doctor-patient relationship is wrong. And Americans don't do well with the order of, because I told you so. Patients are better served hearing from the physicians that are actually treating COVID patients. With a mandate, where's the physician? Doesn't a consultation with a caring physician sound better than a government-executed vaccine mandate that comes with the threat of losing your livelihood? Ask yourself that question. Next, I'd like to present Dr. Andy Harris, one of the co-chairs of the Doctors Caucus.
Thank you, Dr. Wenstrup. As my co-chair, Dr. Wenstrup, said, COVID is just clearly not going away. That's becoming more clear day by day. We are just not going to shut it down. It'll be with us for a long time, maybe even forever, just like the flu is. And it's clear the Biden administration now doesn't really have a plan to combat the virus besides mailing people tests and pushing less than effective boosters. It's becoming clear that we're not going to be able to boost or mandate or test our way out of this virus, and we're way behind on therapeutic options. Other than monoclonal antibodies, which interestingly enough, most of which aren't effective against Omicron, and we don't know whether any of them are going to be effective against the next variant, other than monoclonal antibodies, there really are no other therapeutic options available other than remdesivir, which has a pretty high failure rate. So what we need to do is we need to ask, the administration needs to do is they need to expand the therapeutic options, especially for late therapy. Many of us know people, maybe family members, maybe acquaintances, who died in an intensive care unit with no therapy available in their last couple of weeks of life. And on a conference call last week, the FDA admitted there are no late therapeutics that are near EUA approval. The bottom line is it's time to cut through the red tape. Just this Operation Warp Speed delivered us a vaccine in less than a year. This administration has had more than a year, the prior administration as well, and we still don't have a late-stage therapeutic. This is what we need if we want to cut deaths. This administration is whistling past the graveyard. It's now my pleasure to introduce Congressman Mike Turner.
Thank you. Last night, members of the Intelligence Committee were informed that Chairman Schiff has asked that the members of the Intelligence Committee present negative COVID tests in order in participating in normal committee events. We have a briefing coming up on Thursday. He's requesting that we present negative tests in order to, in his words, look to the attending physician's recommendations for how to safely conduct work here at Congress. So while Americans struggle to just get basic access to testing, while American workers every day risk exposure to the COVID virus, while American families who are caregivers for the elderly worry about exposing their family members to COVID, while this administration has failed to provide sufficient tests in preparation for the Omicron surge, while American workers and families are facing vaccine mandates and vaccine ID mandates to go to restaurants, and parents are dealing with closed schools, Chairman Schiff believes that members of Congress should be tested just to show up for work. The American public does not have this privilege, and we will not comply. The Biden administration failed to plan for needed testing for the American people. Schiff believes that he should have a privilege that the average American worker does not. Our members will not comply with Schiff's request that we submit to COVID testing just to do our job, and I have a copy of the email request that I'll be providing to you. Thank you. And now I put this to Jordan.
2 years ago this month, Dr. Fauci has put on notice that the virus most likely came from a lab that was doing gain-of-function research. He gets a letter on January 31st, 10:32 p.m. 2020. He gets an email, from Dr. Christian Anderson that says, the virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. Dr. Fauci goes into complete overdrive to cover this information up and not present it to the American people. He organizes a conference call the next day with Fauci, Collins, and 11 virologists from around the world on that call. Dr. Gary on that call says this: I don't know how this happens in nature, but it would be easy to do in a lab. 4 days later, those people who express those sentiments start to change their position. They write a piece in Nature Medicine magazine on February 16th. It first gets published online. That piece is then cited on February 9th, 2020 in the now famous letter in The Lancet that becomes the gospel that this thing, according to Fauci and this group, didn't come from a lab. All that happens in 20 days. So they go from this thing looks engineered, this thing is not consistent with evolutionary theory, this thing could not have happened in nature, this thing would be easy to do in a lab, to completely changing their position. And here's the kicker. The two guys who said those things, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, 3 months later get rewarded with an $8.9 million grant from Dr. Fauci to continue to do research on coronavirus. I mean, I think there's a couple obvious questions that should have been, that should have happened 2 years ago this month. Why didn't Dr. Fauci, when he first got put on notice that this was happening after that conference call on February 1st, why didn't he notify the commander-in-chief? We have no evidence that he talked to the President of the United States. We have no evidence that he talked to any of his bosses. He spent the time trying to change the narrative. Dr. Fauci got a chance to edit the very article that became the basis for the letter in The Lancet, which, as again, we all know, became the gospel that this couldn't have come from a lab according to these experts. So I think those are important questions. If, in fact, the American people put us back in charge, this will be something that we will spend a great deal of time getting to the bottom of. I want to thank my colleague, Ranking Member Comer, for the letter that we put out last week that begins to highlight this and uncovered the redacted emails where we now know what Dr. Gary said when he said this thing had to have come from nature. So I think this is important. We will continue to work on this this year as much as we can. But again, the obvious question, I'll leave you with this, the obvious question is, why don't Democrats want to know this? Why don't they want to know how the virus started that has disrupted our lives for now almost a full 2 years? Why don't they want to know? Why don't they want to do the investigation? Why won't they call in these virologists, Dr. Gary, Dr. Anderson, who initially said this thing came from a lab? They won't do it. That's a question that needs to be answered. Mr.